Okay, so this is my commentary on Proverbs chapter 21. There are 3 verses left in this chapter that I've yet to go over. I finished last time with verse 28, and I'm going to continue now with verse 29. A wicked man hardens his face, but as for the upright, he directs his way. For what can we say of a wicked man? Thus far, I have been using the fool, the wicked, and the evil in that sort of hierarchy. These are the 3 that you see often referred to in the book of the Proverbs. And the wicked, being in the middle of these 2, occupies this space of selfishness, of internal desire, of poor empathetic consideration. They don't necessarily desire corruption. They just desire their self-interest, whereas the fool sort of inadvertently does so. He, by his actions and by his behavior, perhaps not all that well thought out, deals with the consequences much like the wicked might deal with them. The evil, on the other hand, I would say, is that of the fool, that of the wicked, but also an extension. There is a level or a layer of awareness that's on top that wishes and desires that which is wrong, that which is contrary to the established good. Now, sometimes, perhaps, the established good is not necessarily or overall good. This is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about in the cosmic sense, or in the sense of some pattern of the world, of moral certainty, that these evil people wish to see these undone. They wish to satisfy their own desires, surely, in a way that does not wish to consider the relationship that they have to others. The evil mind is that which desires the darkness, it desires that lack of intelligibility, perhaps not so much for themselves, but certainly for others, and perhaps even for themselves as well, for all of the human race, perhaps based on his condition, and thereby his limitation. Who knows, but I mention that as just sort of a superficial precursor into my exploration into these terms. And I think now that we have been exposed again, we are prompted again to consider the wicked. It is time to dive back into that term. Now, of course, we can define the wicked as a person that is morally corrupt. We think of the root of the word that stems from Old English, Wicca, W-I-C-C-A, which meant sort of a wizard or a sorcerer. I think in the modern conception, this wizard or sorcerer had supernatural powers. Perhaps in the olden days they felt the same, but not necessarily the way that we conceptualize the supernatural today. When I think of a wizard or a sorcerer in the old world, I think of a person that is quick-witted, that can put together and that can walk the spiritual realm with a degree of competency. The spiritual realm that occupies a space of experience, of perhaps a transitional or a transpersonal intelligence, something that perhaps is composed of many emergent elements that is beyond any particular one mind of man, and they use that space and they find themselves in a position of authority such that they can control it, and they can direct it for their own purposes. Perhaps they find themselves in positions of power beneath the king, or whatever it might be, and they use these religious tendencies and the attention of man as it finds its holy home to do perverse and selfish things. Now, I think this, more so than the colloquial definition of wicked, that which is just somebody that does something morally corrupt, is getting at the heart of what it means to be wicked. Because if we were just to say that somebody is morally corrupt, these days, I think, perhaps it's just me, it's difficult to determine exactly what that means. But when I say something about a person that occupies a space, that occupies the space of mind, the intelligible sphere, such that they are cunning, they are deceiving, that they take the emotions and the reason, the justification for man's experience, and distort it. That, to me, I can understand and appreciate that moral depravity. A wicked man hardens his face. So what does it mean to harden one's face? Well, let's consider the adjective, to harden. When something becomes hardened, we can think of water under freezing temperatures. Physically, what we would expect to see is molecules moving closer together. They are in motion, but they are less so. Their vibratory motion is less so. They form this compact structure such that it is what we would call hard. It is more rigid. It is stiff. It is unyielding. I can think of the same analogy that applies to my desk in front of me. When I put my hands on it, I feel something that is firm. Again, it is unyielding. There is no give to it. And what of the face? The face is something that is quite descriptive. If I'm to look at myself in the mirror or somebody else, it tells us a lot about the inner workings of a person's mind. I think about if I look at my cat's face, there are plenty of things that he may do, although it is not quite similar to my own expressions. But I can recognize, after having dealt with his sort for some time, that there are particular things that cats will do to communicate with their eyes, with their ears. The face, much like the mouth, is a mode of communication. But it is different than the mouth in that it does not involve speech, but it does involve transmission of meaning. And so what we see here is an unyielding, I want to say stop, but that's not very descriptive. It's a ceasing, it is an ending to that descriptive apparatus. It's as if one wished not to speak. Now, for the wicked, speaking would be impossible, because they have to manipulate their words to get what they want. I suppose they can do so with their face as well, but to harden the face is to put an end to that expressive quality, that medium of exchange of meaningful information. And by stopping that exchange of meaningful information, The wicked, I think, find themselves within, as they all too well do. They find themselves within the space of the ego, within that space of mind, such that perhaps they feel safe with their emotions, or they feel that they are being strategic by not giving away what they're truly feeling. And I think it's important to reflect. I think we all have wicked tendencies. We all have foolish tendencies, perhaps evil tendencies. And it is not until we are set straight, we are set right by something beyond us, that we then begin to see our behavior for what it is. And I have to wonder at times about my behavior and the way that I carry myself, exactly what it's for. If I am doing right by the people that are around me, if I'm doing myself justice in maintaining this experience as I ought to, if I am accepting that responsibility that has been given to me from beyond, from the divine logos, the mind of minds, the creator of intelligibility itself, or am I wasting it? Am I corrupting that very intelligibility? Am I attempting to undo creation? I think one can drive themselves mad with the subtleties of their behavior. I think there are other things that one may engage in that they know is perhaps incorrect, but they do it anyway. Again, from the last verse, a false witness shall perish, but the man that hears speaks constantly. I also have to wonder if I can pinpoint that wickedness. What does it feel like if there's an aspect of the self that just ought not be? Is there a way for the self to rid itself? And perhaps that's a wicked proposition in and of itself, because it's not accepting an outside influence to make that decision. But perhaps not. Perhaps it is the very act of recognizing that there is something that can be done about it. That there is a solution to one's laziness or to one's poor habits, to one's inattentiveness. The desire for inattentiveness, I think, gets us into all sorts of trouble. Whether it be sitting down to watch television for too long, or all of the useless tools or tools that we have to use to useless ends, perhaps I should say, because I suppose that there are the tools that we have, technologically speaking, can be used quite effectively towards righteous ends. But again, I wonder at where this wickedness lies within me. Is it this sort of continuous stream of possibility that must be corrected by a faithful self, a faithful mini version of that divine logos? And what of the heart? What can it tell me? My experiences, my feelings. I tend to be a person of a rather melancholic disposition. This is something that has been with me my entire life, but I don't necessarily use this as a negative. It is something that must be controlled It must be something that is set right by exercise, by reflection, by reading, by interaction, by experience, but it is difficult because the disposition is always calling towards absence of experience, pacification of mind. It is that feeling, that overbearing feeling, the burden of existence, that at times, almost at all times, I feel. At times it feels like a dagger in the side, which is why the heart desires that pacification and that satisfaction of being relieved of it. But also it's an indication that whatever is being done is not enough, that the call is higher, to something that is more, something that is more meaningful, more purposeful. And is it the case, perhaps, that the ignoring of the call, the placing of the covers over one's head, in the metaphorical sense, such that the intelligible sphere, the heavenly sphere, is obscured from view, the third eye is closed? Is this behavior wicked? Or is it foolish? I suppose what the ends are. I suppose it does matter. I was proposed a question the other day. This is a good opportunity for myself to exercise that reflective aspect so that I could return perhaps with a good answer. But there was a retired policeman, retired detective. I was having a conversation with him about philosophical matters. This was rather an aside, but it was an interesting question, I suppose. The question was, if a poor person or a homeless person, whatever, was caught stealing, is it still stealing? And my answer was, well, of course it's still stealing. It's a person that's hungry, in need, that is stealing. Now, I maintain that position. I don't think that just because the person is hungry, they have the right to steal and to take. However, upon further reflection, I do think that there is a difference between somebody that is hungry and without, and in a bad way, that steals, versus somebody that steals for what we say might be boosting, stealing merchandise that is not necessarily food or the essentials of daily life. But you see this often in the drug-addicted communities. They'll steal, they call it boosting. They run into stores. These are not starving or hungry people. They take luxury merchandise to sell it on a side street somewhere, either to fuel their drug habit or to get money for who knows what. But the point there being is that there is a difference between these two cases. One deserves, I think, some sympathy, but not to the degree that it absolves them from guilt. Surely, in these situations, if somebody is hungry and, let's say, I had something to offer, something to give, I think it would be important to do so. But again, it doesn't justify criminal behavior. A wicked man hardens his face, but as for the upright, he directs his way. So the wicked is closed down, and here we see this image of the righteous opening up, directing his way, instead of being insular, hardened, not wanting people to come into his experience or to be related to another in an intimate sense. The upright they direct their way. Now, what does that mean? So we have two things that we have to talk about. The upright, and then the direction, and then the way, I suppose. And so three things. So literally, I consider myself to be a bit of a literalist in terms of interpretation, literal to the, or rather, according to the word as it is, that upright is that we think of a posture. We think of poor posture as something or a position for which a person is hunched over. Some of this can be age-related, but poor posture is poor posture. And that if somebody is upright, they have good posture. That all those fine paraspinal muscles are activated. The leg muscles are strong to support the body. And there's a sense of goodness about being upright. There's something off about being in a hunched over position. It limits your ability. It limits your function. It limits your purpose. But for the upright, their purpose is known. It is understood. It is appreciated. It is attended to, which I think goes into the direction. That direction is facilitated by the attention to the upright nature. And when there is found these postural deficits, the correction of those is the direction. But then what is the way? I suppose the way could be rightness. It is right posture. But it's not posture for posture's sake. We have an upright posture to do things, but what is it that we are doing that makes this posture right, or that makes this posture worthwhile, this good posture worthwhile? You know, sometimes I think that it's easier to know where not to go than it is where to go. That when one feels this danger, perhaps it is wound up in a bit of that melancholic disposition. When one feels that stagnation approaching, that wish for the pacifier, the existential pacifier, that to go away from that at least is a start. To always be doing something to occupy the mind, to benefit the body, to benefit the mind, to form closer and stronger relationships, to form a web of tight-knit social connections and relationships, not just connections for the sake of connections, but connections for the sake of goodness, for the sake of connectedness, for the sake of love, and for the sake of shared experiences. There is no wisdom, nor understanding, nor counsel against the Lord. So let's start talking about this word wisdom. I was looking through a source here for the etymological chain. It's somewhat unsatisfying. I heard somewhere once that all good definitions of the word wisdom include something to do with connectedness or of binding. And here I suppose there's a degree of it. It would be by extension, but it's not directly so. That of wisdom in Old English meant knowledge gained through experience and understanding. There's a skill and ability component, not just being intellectual knowledge, but also practical understanding. Judgment and good sense, the ability to apply knowledge wisely in different situations. Now, using the word wise there doesn't help us at all. And it seems as though the word wisdom had fluctuated between things, between intellectual and moral aspects. And I suppose if it's moral, then we are getting closer to that the rightness and wrongness and bondedness that is in there. In the 17th century, we have the emphasis on deep understanding, judgment, the ability to make sound decisions based on knowledge and experience. This is what we use today. From the Proto-Germanic root, we have the meaning of intelligence or mental sharpness. We have words like wit, which mean the same. What I've come to think from the Proverbs is that wisdom certainly does include this binding component. The question is, well, what does a wise person bind together? I've had discussions about the binding of different nodes in the network being broadly the intelligible sphere, the meaningful sphere, the immaterial sphere. The nodes in the network are the beings that can occupy that space, no matter how low they are on that totem pole. I sort of wonder and marvel at the possibility of all matter occupying this realm to a certain degree. You know, the strange, fanciful thinking in absence of a strong understanding of the material world, I suppose, but regardless, this network and the connection between the nodes, it forms that, at least for man, this sphere through which he is able to form his societies, form collective bodies in general, whether it be a tribe or a corporation, a political institution, a religious institution, a family, perhaps even a coherent self. And as I've mentioned before, I'm not sure if I mentioned it in this episode, but of the transpersonal nature, once man has oriented himself into a conglomeration with other beings and other people, what begins to emerge beyond that is the spirit and the agent that walks upon the flooring of his collective mind. And from that, we see beyond, and we imagine that there are forces beyond ourselves that occupy this intelligible sphere. Perhaps they are not at the same level, perhaps they don't think the same way we do, but they are there, and we can interact with them, we can be influenced by them, and we can influence them. Perhaps the distinction of them is not appropriate here. Perhaps there's a better way to think about the intelligences or the motion of, again, the intelligible sphere that seems to walk on that flooring that I had mentioned. But regardless of how we wish to conceptualize these forces or these phenomena, what we are concerned with here is connectedness. We're talking about wisdom. We're talking about understanding. And we're talking about counsel. So perhaps I should mention that this is a new day. I had finished about the first 30 minutes or so the night previous, and so it's going to take me a little bit to get back up to speed here. Now, I won't go into the conversation of wisdom again, but some brief reiteration, I think might be important. There are a couple additions that I would like to add to the etymology of wisdom. Hopefully I haven't mentioned them already. The suffix, the dom element, D-O-M, emphasizes wise judgment. It is aligned with the act of knowing and seeing clearly. There has been a connection by some scholars of the Latin root sapiens, which is another word for wisdom, a verb meaning to taste. And it's an interesting conceptualization that we are being brought into here, because wisdom really is a conceptual mapping that is brought on by experience, and this map is an understanding of what exactly? If you taste something and you see something, what are you doing? Well, you're interfacing with the world, of course, but just interfacing with the world, and this gets back into the discussion that I had about attention to particular things, but I think fundamentally what we are concerned with is relatedness and relevance. And so the wise person, they taste the relevant factors. If you taste life, it's not like putting one thing into your mouth and the taste that is, well, how should I say this? Taste is a difficult thing. It's easier to conceptualize it in terms of seeing, but taste, certainly there are different types of information that we can perceive of when we taste something. And much like seeing, if we are to taste life and experience, it is not one thing that we are putting in our mouth. It's a lot of different things that enter in all at once, just like we can imagine our visual sphere. It's much easier to appreciate visually because we could just turn our head and there's just so much information. But our mouth space is limited. The surface area of our tongue is limited. And so we can't really lick all of our experience, right? But I know this is not necessarily what the foundation of the word necessarily means, but it's a reference. It's a reference to the experience of taste. But such that we can appreciate that reference, I think we can develop preferences. We can understand, we can associate a causal relationship between something of a certain taste and the way that we feel after we eat something. And perhaps there may be an intricate relationship between the two. Something may taste good that makes us feel bad. Something may taste bad that makes us feel good. So, and there may be something that tastes bad that is bad for us. And so there's a lot of this variability. There's a lot of experience to be had there. But again, it is about this map. It is about the relevance pieces of information on the map. And it's about how the relevant pieces are related to other relevant pieces, such that we can make sense of the image that we're looking at. You know, I have this painting that is in my room. It's a Salvador Dali. It's one of these, much like the images that I use on the front of the podcast. It is, what would you call it, surrealist type of artwork. The image itself doesn't really make any sense. There's some discernible elements about it, like a woman, and there's a face that she's reaching up towards. It looks like she's in a desert. Far back in the periphery, there's some sort of mountain, and bizarrely, there's like a massive I-beam and maybe a couple 2x4s that are supporting this angelic-looking face. But it's not really supported by anything. It's just a strange image. It doesn't really make any sense. The woman, her face doesn't have any discernible features. You know, so it's one of these things that you got to wonder. A couple things really. You have to wonder what was going on in this guy's head when he was painting it. You got to wonder also at the cultural condition, such that man is painting things that have some identification, but also this sort of bizarre periphery, the bizarre types of, what would we say, the types of information that just don't quite cut it. They don't quite come together in some sort of intelligible image. And that's part of the reason why I like these images, because the experience of life and the experience of trying to interpret life is sort of like that a lot of times. Now, hopefully it's the case that we can make sense of what we are experiencing after a while, even if it's just sort of a preliminary observation. It may take us 5 minutes to adjust to the experience and what's going on. Maybe if we meet somebody new, it takes us a little bit to get comfortable and to pay attention to what we're doing. Maybe we're in a new environment, maybe we're going out on a date, and there's a lot of things that we have to sort of sift through such that we can pay attention to the relevant pieces of information so that the date goes well. And so anyway, this sort of surrealist type artwork is that way. Now, the images themselves don't evolve into something that is coherent. Sometimes there are pieces of art that take a little while for a coherent understanding to develop, and perhaps it's a bit sinful for me to include these images, but I do so nonetheless because of my journey and my trying to make sense of this thing, this experience that is life. I think the broader pursuit of trying to make sense of it, rather than the individual minute experiences, is much more difficult on the larger scale. Smaller scale is manageable. But I say all that to say that wisdom is, I think, a place in which somebody can be. I don't think it's not necessarily a static place, but a person can be wise, and they can operate in the space where they're sort of cognitively in shape enough to put together various pieces, big patterns, small patterns, to make sense of things. And wisdom extends in not only the material sphere, I think, but also in the heavenly sphere, the spiritual domain, the psychological domain, the domain of mind, of feelings, of morals. Now, this word understanding, this is another one that we have to talk about. Since we've talked about wisdom, what difference is there between the word wisdom and the word understanding? In my mind, I think that there is an overlap between the two. And since I'm sort of a literalist, I look at the word understanding and I see two words there. I see the word under, and I see standing. And so, thus far, I've been playing around with this. It's not the only conceptualization that I have for the word understanding, but if we imagine that we are standing on something, whatever is beneath us, that may take me a few different analogies here to get this down, but if we imagine that we are standing on something and what is beneath our feet is unstable, we will not be upright. We will fall over. If we are standing on something, like for example, if I was to stand up now, this room that I'm in, it's a nice flat floor, there's concrete beneath it, it's a strong, sturdy building, I'm not going to fall over, unless it has something to do, sort of intrinsic. There's nothing to do with my misunderstanding of the environment that would allow me to stumble and to fall. And because of that, I'm confident that I will be able to ambulate through my room without falling through the floor, because I have some visual and proprioceptive mapping such that I have a degree of confidence and faith that the ground that I walk on is sturdy. Now, that is a metaphor, of course, for something broader. It is a physical example for something broader. We can expand that into mind. We can think of psychological principles where that might be the case. I mentioned earlier an analogy about the transpersonal agents that walk upon the flooring of the intelligible mind of man. I think that within man's mind, he has this similar sort of flooring, hopefully. And that flooring is this sort of stable sphere upon which his self, his ego, his heart, whatever, can walk on and not falter and not fall into self-delusion or addiction or the various psychological ailments that we can and often do experience. And so to reiterate, understanding involves faith to a degree. It involves observation. It involves knowing in the sense of confidence. I think we can know up to a certain degree. We can keep on trying to chip away at precision, and we can get quite precise. We can get much more precise than we need to be confident that a floor is going to hold us, for example. And we can drive ourselves crazy by going through exactly why it is that this floor is going to hold us. But to a certain degree, I think in many experiences, it's not necessary to go into a certain degree of precision. But again, that's not to say that precision is not important. It's just to say that understanding involves this process of getting to a point where we are confident enough to have the type of faith that will allow us to act and to move in the world, in the physical sense, but also in the cognitive, intelligible, intellectual sense. So now the question is, what is the difference between wisdom and understanding? I think both wisdom and understanding involve sight. It involves this third eye sense of faith and understanding, of seeing the world, of processing information. Of understanding, I would say that it's more of a linear experience. It is much like the analogy that I had said, is understanding the particular. It's understanding the precision of something, that confidence such that you know that you are right enough. I think there's a strong physical and material component here. And I say that because it's involved with the behavior and action of the world, as is wisdom, but this understanding is much closer to the scientific. It is this, again, way of understanding and having confidence in your motion, in your experience, although it does extend beyond that. Now, wisdom, as I've said before, is involved in the binding. I would conceptualize wisdom as something that is more dynamic. It is less linear. It is involved with the mind's experience and relatedness to the various elements that are also related to one another. And it is also an experience, but it is an experience of discovering how these things are related. It's not necessarily one thing that we are considering in terms of understanding, which we can go down the rabbit hole of the scientific enterprise and precision and connectedness to that one thing and really understand that one thing. But it's the whole of it. It's big picture. It's big picture, but it's fractal, and it's small picture as well. As we dive into something, wisdom, I think, within the pursuit of understanding, we can move into that sort of philosophy of understanding and that wisdom of bondedness, because at every level, I think that we can find different nodes at different levels. For example, we can have cities that are interrelated to one another. Within the cities, we can imagine different institutions within the cities that are related. We can imagine that within the institutions there are different subcategories of that institution. Within the subcategories there are individuals that are related to one another. They have their institutional roles, but also their personal familial roles, and we can extend back into the family. There's a lot of undulation within this experience in the enterprise there. And so within the understanding of the particular, there is also this sort of mapping, this wisdom mapping of bondedness between different nodes and elements that are required for big picture understanding. And big picture understanding perhaps at a certain level, because it can be at quite a small microscopic level. But you can also, again, put pieces together within there. And so there is this overlap between wisdom and understanding. But as of right now, what I choose to consider is that wisdom is more dynamic and understanding is sort of more of a linear process. There's no wisdom nor understanding nor counsel against the Lord. So our next step here is to discuss the word counsel. Now, counsel, I think of two things. I think of a group of people that deliberate together. And I think of counsel as information, that is, advice given to somebody. Now, from the Latin, we have concilium, meaning debate, discussion, deliberation. Of course, the Romans had their councils, who were high political officials that exercised authority. And of course, they were responsible for decision making. This matter of counsel, I think, is an interesting one. As perhaps I'll say this, so I don't trip over my words. Whenever the word Lord or God is used in a proverb, it is another piece, another opportunity for us to shine the light or a light on a term that seems so elusive, seems so difficult to understand. What is this pinnacle of intelligibility, this divine logos? There is no wisdom, nor understanding, nor counsel against the Lord. This counsel, this deliberation, this seeking of advice, this decision-making, it seems as though it would be possible for one to make a decision against God. It would seem to be possible to deliberate against God. But this is only true if we see God in a certain way. And I think this is what highlights the important aspect of paying attention to when the word Lord or God is used in the Proverbs. Because if we have a particular conception that doesn't match with what is being said here, then our conception is not matching the biblical conception. So one must ask the question then, if there is no wisdom, there is no understanding, no counsel against God, then what does that mean for the ultimate? What does it mean for God? Again, the question I raised earlier about deliberation against God, is it possible that I can sit here in front of this microphone and deliberate and think about that which is against God? It would seem that it would be possible. It would seem that I can consider evil, I can consider bad things. But even among these reflections of evil and bad, these things both operate within the intelligible sphere. Nothingness, the absence of intelligibility, is not something I think that can really be understood. There's no place to stand on it. It is inherently unstable. It is not anything. As soon as something tries to be within it, or find itself observing it, the observation is nothing. The attempt at wisdom towards binding nothing, there's nothing to bind. In terms of advice about nothing, or deliberation on nothing, it would be nothing. And so, this conception of God rests within a type of mind that is of similar experience, perhaps to a degree, that man has, of being aware, of having this self, of being able to connect things in relation to that conscious self. That to man, lack of intelligibility is nothing. It is his existence would cease to be anything. His being, his soul, would have nothing to ground it. There would be no landscape for which the artist can represent. Now, there are a vast number of possibilities by which we can conceptualize this logos, or the order, the fundamental principle of order that arranges things, that reckons, that discerns, that speaks, let's say. But it is because of this, the speaking, it is because of the discernment, that there is this order, that there is this experience and landscape for which beings and objects can move and participate with one another. It's not arbitrary. It's not nothing. It's not necessarily random. And I imagine this logos, that centerpiece of intelligibility, for which all of the various nodes are connected to it, both material and also self-aware, like in the human case. If those self-aware nodes attempt to move away, whatever that might mean, I think moving away would wish to mean to perform their own act of creation, to find nothingness and put forth intelligibility and experience into that nothingness. I think there's an aspect of that is admirable, but there's also an aspect of that is limiting, because there is no intelligibility beyond the logos. It is all intelligibility. And we happen to be a part of that experience, or of that being. We are the little nerve cells that are part of the larger substructure, or larger macrostructure. And I don't necessarily mean to say that we are part of some big mind, but what I do mean to say is that our participation in the environment influences the landscape that we find ourselves in, much like a painting that is not static, but it is moving. The pieces that are moving within the painting can alter the painting's image. And ultimately, the painter can witness these changes, can make corrections, can be surprised, perhaps, at the change that is occurring by his own hand, from his own hand. There is no wisdom, nor understanding, nor counsel against the Lord. In the absence of any additional reflection here, I'm content to leave it at the instability of nothingness. But certainly I will return to this thought and this topic. The horse is prepared against the day of battle, but safety is of the Lord. Now this is the final verse of chapter 21. And it's a rather strange verse. Strange in the sense that we don't often see verses of this character. There is no immediate repetition in terms of the particular words that are used. I'm not sure that we've seen the word horse up until this point in the Proverbs. Surely we've dealt with the concept of safety. But the first half of this verse is not immediately clear what it means. The horse is prepared against the day of battle. And what can we say of this? What sense can we make of it? The horse is man's carrier. The horse is a lower intelligence that has been brought into the sphere of some larger, broader intelligence that participates in something that it doesn't quite understand. Perhaps its participation is willful to a degree, but also subservient in another. That perhaps to the degree of its obedience, it accepts its position, and there is an understanding of what it must do in battle. I think that animals that are trained for a particular purpose, I think to a degree also understand that purpose, like dogs, for example, as they are trained for hunting explosives or trained to hunt down a criminal and to attack that criminal and not attack their owners. Police dogs often go home with their handlers. And here implies this differentiation between what should be done and what should not be done. Now, of course, animals have the tendency to abandon this sort of understanding, whatever level it may exist at. But nevertheless, I think we can appreciate that it exists. And the reason that I'm bringing all of this up, because the horse seems to me to imply, again, an existence at a particular level. The horse is prepared not necessarily of its own doing. It is prepared by the intelligence that is above it. It is fitted with its saddle and its armor. It is trained. It understands what it must do when the time comes. That's what it means to be prepared. It has practiced, has spent the time. We can also say that within the care and the safety that man provides his carrier, he is also providing himself with a degree of safety, not only because of the preparation in terms of the training, but also because of the mounting of armor, the deployment and review of strategy. But safety is of the Lord. And this seems to imply that despite the acts, despite the what man can foresee, he will never really truly know if he's going to be safe in battle. There's a lot of variables, and I think that this is something that can be extended quite far out. That is to say, Man may not understand in life exactly the path that he must walk. He may not necessarily understand the aspects of life that lead him to a place of safety. He may not understand what safety is altogether. And despite one's preparation, there is always that possibility for risk and damage. And it says, but safety is of the Lord. It is of that place. It is of that thing. It is of that body that we are ultimately connected to, that provides that surety. It provides the understanding, the true understanding, the full understanding. And that true safety, perhaps, is not a mere matter of physical comfort and satiation, but safety is the liberation from evil. It is the liberation from undue constraints, whether they be self-imposed or external. I think there's another reflection here, that when we imagine, we bring into the mind that reflection that I had brought up just a moment ago about the levels and layers of intelligibility, that in this example man's mind rests sort of at the top, whereas the horse is beneath him to a degree, a conscious agent of its own that has a will of its own, but the level of its intelligence exists at a particular plane. And we, above that plane, interact with that intelligence and use it for our purposes. Now, above us, we can say that there are many such things. Perhaps not in the same way that we are above the horse, but within that intellectual realm, certainly we can imagine the forces that sway us. And at the top, that logos of all intelligibility, that Lord, that God, it has a uniting factor between the two sides that are in conflict. And we can see preparation on both sides. Both horses are prepared for battle. They have done their training. And yet, under man's conception, he believes that he will win, or he believes that what he is doing is right. Regardless of who is right, perhaps, the multiple factors that go into the necessity for one making preparation in the first place will come to some ultimate conclusion. One side will win the battle. But even within this victory, we cannot be assured of much. I think of the Peloponnesian War and the experience of Athens after their invasion of Sicily. When they were defeated and a few stragglers returned home, and this was a massive defeat, one of the final blows, I think, of that war, which severely weakened the Athenian power and domination in the region. They had a series of conflicts that were spread across the Greek islands, and many of these they won, some of them they lost. There were a series of revolts that happened in their confederate states because they understood what had happened in Sicily and they saw it as an opportunity to revolt. But the point here is that the generals that fought and won these subsequent battles in the islands, they must have felt a particular way about the whole of the experience. Perhaps they felt good or hopeful about the Athenian place after they had won or defeated or quieted a rebellion, that perhaps the tides were turning in their favor. And yet, Thucydides gives us the overview, the sort of level of understanding, of perception that is beyond one particular person and perhaps even beyond a particular general. That gives us the true picture. And this true picture we understand, although it is not explicitly stated. What begins to emerge is the understanding that Athens was dealt a severe blow, and it really doesn't matter, these relatively small conflicts in the Greek Isles, because the broader conflict is in dire straits, at least from the perspective of the Athenians. And so even if they had won a number of these battles, their safety and their security is not guaranteed. And there's this sort of false correlate between winning and being safe and secure. And I think this example further illustrates this layeredness, that one can see something at a particular level in the immediate sense. Like if these two sides were to go into battle, their horses are prepared, they're ready, they believe that they can win. But again, we zoom out broad, big picture, and that observation, the mind at that level, understands and sees a different picture. We can imagine just continually zooming out fractally until we reach the supreme understanding of all. Of course, man's experience and existence doesn't occupy that space. It is incapable to do so. But it is something that has enough light, much like a flashlight in the darkness. If we turn on a flashlight in a field somewhere at night with no lights around, that light will permeate the darkness, surely. But it will only permeate so far. It will not permeate the entire earth. Far from it. And that's much like, I think, our experience. We can never hope to permeate the entire world with our minds and our understanding. There may be a way collectively that we can do so, but an individual does not occupy that space, that space of the logos, or of the divine logos, I should say. Okay, so I think I'm going to end this episode here. This is the end of chapter 21. I will begin next time with chapter 22, verse 1.